You are wrong about Diablo 4, and the reason you are wrong is because you are missing the good parts of the game since the bad things about it just stand out so much. I'll tell you what the good parts of the game are, and I will even tell you why you are just playing it wrong. The good things about Diablo 4 are easily overlooked because, well, because of a lot of things actually. The brand does a lot of heavy lifting for the game's success. You expect the Blizzard game to be a certain way, and you expect the Diablo game to be a certain way. Well, you should expect it anyway. As much as you want to admit it or not, it is actually very satisfying to slay demons. The game does a fantastic job at giving you a visceral feel of pure, unadulterated satisfaction when you press your abilities and demons fall at your feet. Everything from the sound to the visual blends nicely into some of the best action RPG monster slaying gameplay feel. The gameplay is satisfying. It is very meaty and very pleasurable to press, I don't know, Hammer of the Ancients off the top of my head. And the monsters look cool, way cooler than in Diablo 3, and very hellish, very demony, which is what they're supposed to do. And not to mention, the best of all is that you look cool. It is so cool to see how much they went into character design and customization, not to mention some of the armor sets and how gothic-y and medievally they actually look and not super colorful and all over the place. I adore the art style overall in the entire game, and it's so easy to get lost into the caverns, into the architecture, into all of the things that make Diablo 4 look like what it actually looks like. And the music is good also. It's dark, it's somber. It is keeping in tune with Blizzard games and when it comes to the sound quality, which is always really great. And this is coupled with the voice acting.
You've made it back. Good.
What does he mean?
This fiend helped me escape from Lilith.
Which is incredibly immersive, especially when you're doing the campaign. I haven't heard, at least not in recent times, a better job at actually voicing characters to make me feel like they're actual people with different dialects and accents depending on where exactly in the world you are when you're doing the main quest or the side quests. And speaking of the actual world, the zones and the templates overall look dark and macabre and gory, which is what you want from a Diablo-like game that's supposed to be dark and heavy and ponderous and all of that stuff that just makes it feel like you're being lost in a dangerous and hellish world. When you pick up a new character, the skills are very easy to understand, especially with the skill tree where you gradually progress to unlocking more and more impactful abilities to your entire kit. It's not a skill tree that a lot of people would like, and it's definitely not the complex webbing of Path of Exile, which that has some value in and of itself, but this is easy to pick up for new players, and I don't have to spend dozens of hours trying to figure out exactly where to put my points, because the respec is also fairly cheap, at least when you level up initially, and it actually makes it clear on what I want when I want a particular build. The Paragon system also, when you get to level 50, is an overall better than the Diablo 3's Paragon system as well. As you level up, you unlock Paragon points, and sure, there are the boring nodes, the 5 strength, the 5 dexterity, but they do have a purpose once you get to the rare nodes, into the glyph nodes that essentially require you to have a specific amount of dexterity selected around it, which is obviously going to make it obvious for you as players like, oh, this is why I have all of these random dexterity nodes. And it makes it very straightforward in telling you exactly what you want to progress through the board. And this quick and easy to pick up mentality is expanded into actually your daily activities. And when it comes to the actual content, you can essentially just log into the game and mindlessly kill stuff in the open world and travel all over the place with no loading screen. Well, you know, with the exception of dungeons, but that's understandable. The side quests are also a nice way to immerse yourself into the world, and they are simple enough where you don't need to look up places online to find that NPC or those bags of demon throats. Another cool thing you can do are the strongholds, which are a really neat way of interacting with the world and making the zone adapt to your action of actually engaging with it. It's fun to go in and have different objectives, destroy different mobs, and liberate those cities that more often than not turn into waypoints, vendors, NPCs, and more side quests, making you feel like you're actually saving the world, which is something that we never really had in Diablo 3 made before, and not a lot of people talk about the fact that the Stronghold is probably the best and most accurate representation of you, the player character, having a positive impact on the world when fighting the demonic hordes of hell. And speaking of hordes, there are over 100 dungeons you can do. Way more than what Diablo 2 had, and definitely way more than what Diablo 3 had. There are so many dungeons, and they all have templates according to their zones to kind of make you feel like, oh, I am in an underwater cave off the coast of dry steppes or whatever. Actually just works. Even though you might not play a barbarian, it's fun to whirlwind around and pay attention to what monsters you fight, since they matter, because you might end up fighting some big ladies that knock you away and break your whirlwind, and playing around that and kind of being aware of what's going around, it is very immersive and very engaging. And this is where it stops. The more you play in a hardcore fashion and you want to sink in more hours, you want to reach that level 100, you want to optimize builds, the more you actually hit certain issues. The gameplay does actually become repetitive. And has close to no depth. I mean, Path of Exile makes Diablo look like a vegan version of a steak that's actually a carrot. Diablo doesn't have to be Path of Exile, clearly, because Path of Exile has its issues in my humble opinion as well, but dear lord, is it a far cry from having complex death to having any death. All the cool graphical and auditory effects that you have in Diablo contribute to actually a poorly optimized game crashes a lot, together with the always online that created issues that seemingly you have to load everybody's inventory once you log into the city, and that's why we don't have extra stash spaces. The zones don't matter, which is sad because nothing is special about a specific zone. There's no differentiating factor in any of the zones whatsoever in terms of what items you might be getting, in terms of what dungeons. The dungeons are pretty much the same, it's just under a different color. And around half the skills that you are using are most of the time useless or pure fillers. Sure, you can play with whatever skills you want and make a fun build, but if you put it side by side with maybe the best build that you can play at the time, you will notice that it takes you double or triple or quadruple the amount of time to kill monsters. And even though fun is really important and you can just play whatever you want, you will notice it. Plus, sometimes the skills that you actually like the companions for the druid, are the shittiest out of all of them and are most of the time a DPS loss to even pick. The Paragon system is actually good but offers zero class depth. It's the same for all the classes, and the legendary nodes, which are specific for your class, are dog shit. The Barbarian, for instance, is maybe the best example here, actually uses almost zero legendary nodes. I am close to level 80 and I have unlocked about 3 to 4 Paragon boards and I don't need any of those nodes. Obviously, that's for optimizing builds, but that just proves to you that the impact that they have is way less than what a legendary node should be. And for most classes it is the same, and most classes value rare nodes and glyph nodes above the legendary nodes. And let's talk about glyphs, because they are actually very boring by themselves. The magical glyphs are actually useless. Why do we have them in the game? You're never using them. Sure, you might make the argument that you're just turning 50 and you have already your Paragon board and no yellow glyphs unlocked whatsoever. How do you have enough Paragon points to put in your Paragon board to unlock the first glyph and no yellow glyphs? That is very unlikely, because likely you will have already looted one by now since they drop everywhere. Why not double the amount of glyph nodes overall in the Paragon board, or more than double, where we end up using more rare glyphs and maybe 1 or 2 magic glyphs? This would give us more power to chase in nightmare dungeons. And as far as endgame is concerned, side quests are actually very repetitive and the rewards are terrible. Because they tied renown to them, they had to make them simple so that renown grind doesn't become more of a hassle than it already is. And because they made them simple and quick, the rewards cannot be too impactful or the story cannot be too interesting, since that wouldn't correlate to the actual time and power invested into completing them. Strongholds are also a more sophisticated version of side quests, which is kind of a good thing, but it kind of also stops there. The event itself is fun, but it gets easy late game and less impactful, and it is a one-time thing. Also, the rewards being very poor. It would be way more interesting if occasionally, similar to Helltides, you lose your strongholds again and have to recapture them for ideally better and cooler rewards. Also, speaking of endgame, the dungeons in the Nightmare Dungeon pool are limited and get way more repetitive that way, since they are the best source of experience, which you would be doing if you want to optimize a little bit, and the only source of glyph levels, which, okay, fair enough, and a decent source of everything else, making all other content not really matter in terms of efficiency. And when it comes to going inside the dungeons, granted the devs did listen to us in increasing the amount of density so that it actually feels more impactful late game when we have big AoE and things die really quick. The amount of crowd control that proportionally increase with the increase in density is outrageous. You will get stunned and frozen and feared into losing control of your character, and sometimes, most of the times, these can chain off of each other where you lose control of the game for a good amount of time. Why do you have to stop me from playing the game? Why is that the criteria for me dying? Why not just offer me counterplay to all of these CCs? Sure, you can say that the revenants can be dodged because you see them arming their swords and then lunging at you. That is true for the earlier stages of the game, but once you have 3 to 4 revenants, 2 to 3 other monsters that freeze you, one that will also stun you, and another one that will also fear you, because the density is so large you cannot account for all of them. And even if you could, that would just be a game of looking at your screen and trying to find which one of these 25 monsters are going to stop you from playing the game. And that's just wrong for Diablo. The game isn't about tactical combat and outplaying the NPCs, it's monster slaying, which you cannot do if you are CC chained, sometimes unavoidable even. And the season 1 is just the preseason with 3 new gems to play with. I'm talking the 3 new slots that you have to play with the gems. The gems can be argued for, but they're also particularly boring. They're sometimes less impactful than glyph nodes that you have in the Paragon system, which is not what you want from a season that's supposed to revitalize the endgame that you're engaging with. And speaking of, endgame gives you uber uniques, which are only available past level 85, which is quite a while down the road, but level 100 only has Uber Lilith, and that's it as a content. There's nothing to farm once you reach level 100, nothing to chase, which means level 100 is the cap, it's the end game, it's the goal, is once you get here, you're done. So you're like, okay, I'm going to be making an alt, but then if the goal is level 100, why does it take so long to reach a point where I can farm Uber uniques to help me ideally get to that end goal, which is level 100? And if you do get to level 85 and you enable the loot table to have Uber uniques, the drop chance is so abysmally low that I don't think I know any single player that has ever looted a single Uber unique. Sure, they've dropped, but they're so rare, you're very likely to never encounter any Uber uniques, even if you level all of the characters to level 100. If level 100 is the end goal, why not just give me access to all of these items a lot earlier or a lot more reliably so that I can actually chase the end goal and get level 100 and then feel like, ooh, that was nice, I'm done now, let's hop into an alt, because there's nothing else to do once I do get 100. Also, when we get to level 100 or when we chase the level 100, why don't we fight any campaign bosses? That is crucial for Diablo games. That is what made Diablo 2 farming, which is arguably more repetitive than Diablo 4 and less content to actually farm, more interesting, because the varied content that you farm is actually ironically more varied, since the campaign bosses are fun. The campaign bosses in Diablo 1 are the best Diablo bosses I have ever had the pleasure of fighting, and you only get to do that once and only once, and the rewards are obviously going to be very poop because you're going to be doing them very early into your leveling career. And there's so many other issues, like the gems that are going to be fixed soon that weren't fixed at the release. Stash issues continuously plague the community and the player base as a whole, and we still have the memory leak, we still have the unoptimized gameplay, we still have a lot of other stuff. Why do we keep having them in the game? Do you know why? Because we pay for them. Our 9-to-5 job doesn't give us enough time to grind inside the game like we used to when we were kids and we were in high school and stuff like that. So we grind the job instead, but we kind of need the job grind to be reflected inside the game to make us feel like we're worth it, like we're progressing through a game that requires progress. So in the end, the game shops are realistically the only way to translate your 9-to-5 grind into the actual game, because you do want to feel like you're participating in the world, and that's the only way left for working people. People want meaningful grinds, but we end up paying for meaningless grinds on the way because people buy microtransactions. The in-game store has no bugs and has tri-weekly content of item sets that you can buy while it takes us whole seasons for us to get stash space. You are paying for the issues the game has. Well, you that's playing right now, and me. We don't like the game because the game is not for us, because we should be voting with our wallets. We are the wrong players for the game because the right players for the game would not play Diablo 4, right devs? That's why you're not making the game for them. Oh, you made the game reward casual players since there are no hardcore players left to buy and play the game. Am I right, devs? Wrong. They are. They're just playing Path of Exile, lol. They could be playing Barbarian. They could be playing these builds that you can check that we already ranked, and they will give you a lot of fun to play in the game if you are still with us.